The story begins in the heart of an ancient world where a man named Abraham was called upon by God. In the cradle of civilization, among the sand dunes and the starry skies, our tale unfolds. A simple man, Abraham, became the chosen one, singled out by the divine for a unique relationship. It was a bond not built on power or riches, but on faith. A faith that was steadfast, unwavering, and absolute. This man, who walked the earth eons ago, held an unbreakable connection with the divine, a connection that transcended the physical world and ventured into the realms of the spiritual. God, in his infinite wisdom, decided to test Abraham, to measure the depth of his faith. This test was not a trivial one. It was a trial that would shake the very foundations of his belief, a challenge that would demand everything from him. And so Abraham, a mere mortal, was faced with the ultimate test of faith. Abraham was not a man of half measures. When God spoke, Abraham listened, and more importantly, he obeyed. This obedience was put to the ultimate test when God asked Abraham to make a sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice, but the sacrifice of his beloved son, Isaac. A request that could shake the foundations of any parent's world. But Abraham, he was different. The test that was set before Abraham was not ordinary. It was a test of faith, a test of absolute trust in the divine. Imagine for a moment the depth of faith it took for Abraham to hear God's command and not falter. The command was clear: take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. Abraham's response was simple, yet profound. He did not question, he did not hesitate. Instead, he rose early the next morning, saddled his donkey, and set off with his son to the place God had shown him. His resolve was unwavering, his faith unshaken. Even when Isaac, unaware of the divine command, innocently asked where the lamb for the burnt offering was, Abraham's answer held a deep truth. He said, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." This was not blind obedience. It was a leap of faith. Abraham trusted God. He believed in his promise, even when the path seemed insurmountable. He was ready to sacrifice what he loved the most, not out of fear or obligation, but out of faith. Faith in the divine plan, faith in God's promise, faith that even when things seemed impossible, God would provide. This leap of faith, this readiness to give up what he cherished the most, was Abraham's true test. His faith transcended the earthly bonds of love and attachment, reaching into the realm of the divine. Abraham was ready to sacrifice what he loved the most because he had faith in the divine plan. But what was the secret Abraham held in God? What gave him the strength to face such a test? The secret lay not in a hidden scroll, a mystical artifact, or a whispered prophecy. It was simpler, yet infinitely more profound. Abraham's unwavering faith in God's goodness and justice. This was the secret that made Abraham a revered figure, a beacon of faith in a world often shrouded in uncertainty. Abraham's faith was not blind. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate act of trust in the divine. Abraham knew that God's ways were beyond human understanding, that his wisdom stretched far beyond the confines of our mortal minds. Yet he chose to believe, to cling to the promise of a God who was both just and loving. He believed that no matter the test, no matter how insurmountable the challenge seemed, God's plan was always for the best. This belief was not a crutch for Abraham, but a source of strength, a wellspring of courage that enabled him to face even the most daunting trials with unwavering faith. But Abraham's faith was not just about acceptance. It was also about action. It was a faith that moved him, that pushed him to step out of his comfort zone, to risk everything in the pursuit of God's promise. Abraham was not a passive actor in his story. He was a man of action, a man who understood that faith was not merely about believing in God, but also about living out that belief in the world. This was Abraham's secret, a secret not hidden away, but lived out loud in the open for all to see. His faith was his secret weapon, his shield against doubt, his beacon in the storm. Abraham held on to God's promise, a secret that fueled his faith. The secret was his unwavering belief that God's plan was always for the best, no matter the trials he had to face. And this, dear friends, is the secret we too can hold in God, the secret that can fuel our faith, guide our steps, and illuminate our path. The moment of sacrifice arrived, but it was not Isaac's life that was taken that day. Abraham, standing on the precipice of his faith, held fast to his belief in God's promise. As he raised his hand, ready to prove his unwavering devotion, the heavens opened. In the nick of time, a divine intervention. God's voice echoed, halting Abraham's hand, a clear testament to the strength of Abraham's faith. God did not desire Isaac's life, but rather, he sought Abraham's trust and obedience. The test was not about sacrifice in the literal sense, but rather, it was about the sacrifice of one's will, the surrender of personal desires for the higher divine purpose. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, his future, and his hope was a testament to his absolute trust in God's promise. In the midst of this intense moment, God provided a lamb caught in a thicket nearby. The lamb, an innocent creature, was God's provision, a replacement for Isaac. This was a clear demonstration of God's mercy and grace. It was a powerful symbol, not only of God's provision, but also of his compassion. Abraham's faith had been tested to the extreme, yet he remained steadfast, proving his trust in God's promise was unshakable. His faith was not blind, but rather deeply rooted in his relationship with God, in his experiences of God's faithfulness, and in the promise God had made to him. And so the reward for Abraham's faith was immense. His descendants multiplied as the stars in the sky, a testament to God's promise. The covenant between God and Abraham was reinforced, and it became a cornerstone for future generations. Abraham's story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of faith and obedience. In the end, Abraham's faith was not in vain. His trust in God's promise, his willingness to surrender all for the sake of his faith, was met with divine grace and provision. Abraham had passed the test, and his faith was rewarded. His story serves as an enduring testament to the power of faith, obedience, and God's unfailing promise. So what can we glean from Abraham's story? What lessons does it hold for us today? As we reflect upon Abraham's narrative, three key themes emerge: faith, obedience, and trust in God's plan. These principles aren't merely relics of a bygone era, but timeless truths that can be applied in our lives today. Let's start with faith. Abraham's faith wasn't just about belief, it was active and dynamic. It was a faith that moved mountains, that left the familiar for the unknown solely on God's promise. In our lives, faith might not always mean a physical journey. It could be a journey of the heart, a journey of the mind. We too can have an active faith, one that dares to believe and hopes against hope, even when circumstances seem bleak. Next, we see obedience. Abraham's obedience was immediate and unquestioning. When God called, Abraham answered. It wasn't a reluctant acquiescence, but a willing submission. This obedience was not out of fear, but out of love and trust in God. In our lives, obedience could mean listening to that quiet voice within us, guiding us to do what is right, even when it's not the most convenient or comfortable choice. Lastly, we observe trust in God's plan. Abraham trusted in God's promises, even when they seemed impossible. He didn't know how or when, but he knew who. In our lives, trusting in God's plan could mean letting go of our need to control, our need to know all the answers. It could mean embracing uncertainty, knowing that even in the unknown, we are held in the palm of God's hand. These lessons from Abraham's life aren't just for a select few, but for each one of us. They're not just for a particular time, but for all time. They're not just for understanding, but for living. Like Abraham, we too can hold a secret in God, a secret that strengthens our faith and guides our journey. The story of Abraham isn't just a tale from the ancient world, it's a blueprint for a life of faith and trust in God. As we journeyed through Abraham's life, we discovered the profound truth that his story is not just about him, but about us as well. It's a mirror where we see our own tests and how we can navigate them with unwavering faith. We explored Abraham's leap of faith, his willingness to obey God even in the face of the unimaginable. We delved into the secret he held in God, a secret that empowered him to pass his test. And we observed how his journey concluded, not with despair, but with a promise fulfilled. The lessons we gleaned from Abraham's story are timeless. They remind us to trust in God's promise, to hold on to faith even when things don't make sense, and to remember that the secret to passing our own tests lies in our trust in God. Remember, like Abraham, we too can face our tests with faith, holding on to the secret we hold in God.